All right, so we got lots to do on the property today. So it's time to get this rig fired up. But first, we've got to give everything on this thing a good what-per. So we're going to review the Omega Ready pre-use inspection process on this XG3140H. Let's get to it. Hey, I'm Tori. Welcome to Omega Ready. Today we're going through our tractor pre-use inspection process. Stick around because we've got a few tips for you that may help save you some money over the life of your tractor. Also, I'll let you in on a little secret because even though I barely know you, you strike me as less shady than everyone else around here. So stick around, maybe you'll learn something. All right, so for today's inspection, we got a pretty straightforward list of things that we're gonna need. So we've got some rags, always gotta have rags. Got some dry film lubricant. Got a side cutter with some zip ties. Got a pick. Got some foil tape, might be called aluminized, but regardless, foil tape. We've got a tire pressure chuck and a tire pressure gauge. We've got a good shop light, specifically with a magnet attachment on it, very helpful. We've got a grease gun, and most importantly for all the cleaning we're going to be doing, we've got an air wand with a rather large extension and an angled tip on it. Critical component, that angled tip. All right, so as you notice, we got the boom up and out of the way, and we're doing that so that we can get full access to what's underneath that hood. So, first thing we're going to do is make sure that our joystick is engaged in safe mode. That means this thing cannot move and that boom cannot come down on me, which means that's a good start to the day. All right, so hydraulics are up and safe. Now we're gonna start under the hood because that's my favorite part on any vehicle. But before I pop this hood, I'm gonna focus on inspecting the ground underneath the tractor, looking for any signs of leakage. Look at that, this thing is bone dry. So hey, I gotta admit, I am capable of being clever from time to time. So I chose this tractor specifically since it's the only tractor I own that doesn't leak yet. Not to say I've got terrible tractors, but most of mine came over on the Mayflowers, so they're on the old side. So let's get this hood open. So actually, hold on a second. As a Midwesterner, hood is the common term use for this apparatus right here. On occasion, I heard the term bonnet bandied about, usually by old timers or gypsies. So what is this sheet metal containment device called in your neck of the woods? Curious. All right, so on this XG3140H, you got my hood release right here on that side. Push that button and I got access to everything that's underneath the hood. So the first thing I'm doing is grabbing my shop light and some rags, and before I touch anything, I'm giving everything a good look over. I'm inspecting any connections for signs of leaks, which are usually gonna collect dust and grime and dirt. It'll be pretty obvious to you as you take a once over on everything around the engine bay. So that includes hoses, that includes piping, that includes sensors, that includes anything that's routing anything, including like electrical equipment. I'm looking for any signs of wires that are out of place or chafing or rubbing. Looking for any of these hose clamps that have come off. And I'm touching everything to make sure it's fully seated. I'm making sure I got a belt on. I'm making sure, again, I got hoses and lines. So just eyeballing this, everything here so far, doesn't look like I've got any concerns. The only sign of any kind of collection is down here by the filter, where clearly I did a piss poor job of wiping it up last time, so that's on me. I'll have to get that this time. So one thing to keep an eye out for, especially on tractors that collect a lot of seeds and chaff in the field, is it makes sense in the wintertime before you park your tractor, if you do such a thing, that you give everything on the front end a good clean. And I was using this tractor pretty late into last, I guess late fall, early winter, and I got a lot of chaff in here that I didn't get cleaned out. So I've got signs of mice up here under the hood, where they were looking for seeds inside the chaff. So next year I'll have to do a better job at this and maybe even put some mothballs in here to keep them rodents out of here, because that sounds like a terrible idea, letting them have access in here. All right, so once I've given everything a good once over and I haven't identified anything that's already wet or given me, any loose clamps or missing components, I start with the oil. My dipstick's located over here on the side of the block, right in front of the starter. It's pretty positively engaged, so I got to give it a good tug to get that thing out of there. But like any tractor, it gets debris built up around the dipstick tube, so it takes only a second to grab a rag and wipe that stuff clean before you pop that tube and drop any debris down there. All right, so it's a little on the low side. I'll be topping that off before we're done here. All right, so once I got the dipstick back in, I take a quick gander at my coolant bottle, make sure that my cap is tight and that I got ample quantity in it, and I'm right in the mid-range there on the coolant, so that's good to go. Again, these are simple checks, only take a second. You'd be an idiot not to at least look. All right, so I'm taking a look at the air path now. I got my air cleaner assembly up here. I'll pull that filter in a bit, but I'm gonna walk my way back from these clamps on the outlet of the filter. They go to a bulkhead connector, and I've got a mass airflow sensor here. Pipe comes down into the compressor inlet. I've got a wastegate turbocharger here, which directly feeds to the engine. There is no charge air cooler on it, unfortunately. Turbine sections here, so I'm looking on the exhaust side, checking for any signs of soot, which I don't see. Everything looks to be buttoned up tight. Kind of touching everything as I go, looking for any signs of coolant leak. I've got an EGR cooler down here, nice and dry. Oil drain back from the turbo, clamps in place, nice and dry underneath. No signs of leakage at the gasket. Pretty straightforward. Then I follow that exhaust path from the turbine outlet up into the after treatment system, which is situated here towards the back of the engine. This Tier 4 final rig's got a DOC and a DPF, and the exhaust path comes from the rear of the tractor towards the front, where it exits out through the bottom into the tailpipe, or the front pipe in this case. I'm looking at any of these clamps that connect the DPF to this can that's the exit of the pipe for looseness in the clamp or any kinds of soot buildup on it. Same goes for the front towards the DOC. Those are nice and tight. I've got a delta pressure sensor here. This is the outlet of the DPF relative to up here for the inlet to the DPF. And I'm making sure that that sensor's in good condition, the clamps are on, and everything is tight, no signs of soot anywhere, so it looks good to go. There's some thermocouples at the turbo outlet, but it's pretty difficult to see, so I'm not gonna even bother trying to get the camera in there to peek. So the exhaust system looks good. I don't show any signs of soot or any missing components, so seems to be buttoned up good for the moment. All right, so we're gonna move on to the cool part, which at least I think it's a cool part, the cooling system inspection. So starting from the back, and we'll work our way forward. So we've got a belt-driven, engine-driven plastic fan, which pulls air through our radiator, which pulls air through a pre-screen, which pulls air from the front of the hood area, which is sealed off from the rest of the tractor by this weather stripping. And I've got two additional coolers up here. I've got a hydraulic cooler and a fuel cooler. And then above all that is the air intake system. So I start at my belt down here, and I go to mid-span on the belt, which is between the alternator and the crankshaft in this case. I'm looking for about a 1/2 inch of deflection. I'd say that's got a little bit more than I like, so I think I'm gonna loosen the alternator up and tighten that up a titch. Then I move over to the fan blades, and I'm inspecting for basically any kind of debris pack that gets onto the plastic. It's not common, but water can make its way up here on a crazy day. But everything feels mostly good. No signs of damaged blades or anything, so it's good to go. I always take my hands, run it on the inside of the hub because it likes to collect a lot of crap on it. Just knock it off because it can cause fan imbalance and give you a weird vibration. All right, so now I've switched to the other side of the tractor. You can see the radiator assembly here, and you can see the pre-screen here. On the LS models, they're meant for like a left side, driver's side access. They're held in place by this little plug. It's one of the main reasons you got to raise the bucket up to get it out of the way. So you pull this knob and you slide that screen out. But before we go into that detail, before I start getting my mitts on everything, you want to inspect your weather stripping, because how this cooling system works, like I was explaining earlier, is that the fan pulls everything through the grill on the front end of the tractor into this like large plenum area, and it works its way through its coolers, back through the pre-screen and back to the radiator where the fan is, and then it ejects it out the backside of the engine. So that doesn't work very well if you have lots of gaps. So you're going to find sections of foam, weather stripping like this along the sides of the the sides of the radiator tower, and weather stripping along the bottom like this. So you're inspecting let's start with the weather stripping. You're inspecting it to see that you've got a touch point, which you can see there, that little black line is where the hood is. That part of the hood is sealing on that part of the weather stripping. So if that hood is adjusted correctly and latched tightly, you should see a black wear mark where the rubber is more or less clean compared to the rest of the weather stripping, which is dirty. So that's the first thing to check for, and then you check for that on the radiator towers. Same thing, that seals on that ledge that's on the inner side of the hood. You can see it a little more clear on the other side. That forms a lip and compresses against this. You're looking for the same thing, signs of a wear mark. You'll see it on this mounting edge here, this clear black line, and it should follow all the way down. You'll notice this foam here. While it's sealed pretty good on that edge, there's a gap here. It looks like the foam is kind of kicked out a little bit. So then we'll come over to the other side and we'll look for that same thing on this weather stripping. It looks like it's got a nice contact point. It looks like it falters a little bit right there in that crook, and then it kind of recovers back there. So getting a titch of an air leak there. Same thing on the foam on this side. It's kicked out a little bit on the bottom, and that's definitely giving me an air leak. Now, why is that important? All these little air leaks mean that your fan is pulling and doing all the work of getting the air to come in here into this plenum, but it isn't passing through any of the coolers. It's passing through these gaps. Just like water and electricity and my brother-in-law, air takes the path of least resistance. So this air, instead of going through all of these coolers and through that screen and through that radiator, is going to have a tendency to go through that gap. So it's not the entire volume of air, it's just a portion of it, but you do yourself well to seal that up. So we'll come back and take a look at what we can do to improve that foam once we get this area cleaned up. So the other area to look at here is the top of the radiator and how the hood seals against it. In this case, I've got a foam pad that's attached to the hood, I'm guessing with glue or epoxy, and it's got cutouts to accommodate the mass airflow sensor, the radiator cap, I'm assuming, and yeah, it's got to be a cap. And then over on the right side here, it looks like it's accommodating that harness that's passing through it. So you're looking for deformation on that foam to ensure that it's sealing against the harness, and you can kind of see it in the upper left corner that it's deformed, and you can clearly see that's deformed in there. And same goes over on the mass airflow side, it's deformed. But you also see some dust buildup. It looks like it's got some leaks. I'm not sure that you're going to seal it up perfectly, but you should do your best to seal it up as best that you can. All right, so Louis touched on earlier, I'm going to pull, Jesus, drop my damn nut. Okay, well, with the nut out of the way, we're going to slide the pre-screen out, and as you can see, there's quite a bit of debris on here. That's from late fall. That's not too bad. Usually you get some really nasty stuff in the springtime. You're cutting your field for your first hay cut, you're gonna get a lot of stuff floating around, so you'll be stopping once every 30-40 minutes to clean this screen off. So basically, you're just gonna wipe this by hand. It falls off pretty easy, even if it gets packed in tight. Take compressed air to it if you want, but I'm not gonna make a mess in here just right now. So, you get it clean, set it aside, run some air through it before it goes back in. So with the pre-screen out of there, you can see it's got a pretty good mess of chaff and debris, seeds and cotton tuft and dogwood tuft and all that crap just kind of laying around in there. So our next plan of action here is to grab our air wand, and we're going to start blowing from the radiator back to get anything that's packed into the radiator out. Obviously the pre-screen is catching most of that stuff, but you're still gonna get dust built up in there. So this is always an enjoyable part for me. I love doing this. All right, so now we're gonna grab our wand, hook it to our compressor, and we're gonna come around with the wand on the back side where the fan is and get the tip in here and blow through the radiator. And after you get one side, you go to the other side, so you hit the air hits it at a different angle. Okay, so now we've got the radiator cleaned out. The pre-screen is still out, and now I'm going to focus my attention on the 2 additional heat exchangers I've got up front. On the back side here, I've got a larger hydraulic heat exchanger. You can just see it behind my finger there. And the guy in the front here is the fuel cooler, fuel heat exchanger. So those, typically they get debris in it, more so because there's no pre-screen in front of them, but the draw through them isn't as bad as it is through the radiator. So we'll come from the back side and give them a good what for 2 with the compressor. After I do one side, I come back to the other because my wand here has a bent tip, but it's at an angle, so I think hitting it from both sides is best. Let's see if this gets more dust out. So a word of caution here, let me give you a little better angle. So this is the back side then of the hydraulic cooler, and it's close faced. Right there is the fuel cooler, so you can see there's a very small gap between the two. But that said, what I wanted to point out here is I'm not ramming this wand into the backside of these fins. I'm keeping it off of it. And I usually go in a up and down motion as I pull it across. And then when I'm finished with that a few times, and I'll just hold it in line with one set of fins as I pull it straight. But I try not to touch it because those aluminum fins get damaged very easily, and you can already see there's a few deformed in there. Maybe I was reckless in the past. I've been known to do such things, but in general, you want to prevent as much of that type of damage as you can. So with those addressed, this here is the engine control unit, the ECU. It's air cooled. They typically are, they could cast aluminum housing, and they usually get quite hot, because that's where all your drivers are for your injectors and such. So it's typically air cooled. Sometimes on a little bit higher horsepower tractors, you'll see that they can be fuel cooled, but this does not have that option. So I always take my compressed air and I try to just get under that edge, blow some air in there. Just try to make sure if any chaff got packed up in there that it does come out. So, I mean, the odds of overheating that thing I think are pretty slim, but regardless, you know, it's up here and it sees a lot of dust, so it's good to keep it clean. All right, let's see if we can't get anything out of there. I think it's mostly just coming from these nooks and crannies on the connectors, so I think it's okay. So after you've got all that done, let's give everything a good once over. Make sure you've got all the debris out of it, and then you can finalize it by hitting that pre-screen with the compressed air and be done with this part. All right, so with everything cleaned off, we're gonna go ahead and reassemble the pre-screen. Just fits on the track, upper and lower, slides into place. Lock nut tightens down, you don't need to crank on it. Sits in there flush, good to go. Okay, so one last item for the cooling system. Don't forget your alternator. This thing's packed in here on the ugly end of the radiator, and mine's even tucked in close to the EGR cooler, which is right back here where you can't see it. Which means it's got some pretty nasty neighbors. It's got the unenviable job of ensuring that your rig has sufficient electrical power, and we're asking it to stay cool with air that's already preheated from the cooling system, as well as radiant heat from the engine. Alternators live a precarious life, and we ask a lot of them. So take a moment and push some air through the housing. It's the least that you can do. I sometimes give my alternator a pat or verbal encouragement to ensure that it knows how much I do appreciate it. But I will say, if you've ever gone so far as to name your alternator, then you're probably a pretty weird person and you should seek help immediately. Don't talk to me. Also, I forgot to mention earlier, take a look at the condition of your belt. Make sure it's adjusted to the right tension and that it isn't missing any chunks. Your owner's manual should state where to check it for tension. It's usually mid-span, and you're looking for a predetermined amount of max deflection at mid-span. All right, so hey, let's touch back quick on that fuel cooler for just a moment. Why does this tractor even have one? Well, to address the emissions requirements for these types of tractors, manufacturers use high-pressure fuel systems that are capable of injecting fuel somewhere up to and around 2,000 bar, which is 29,000 psi, which requires a good amount of effort to get pressure that high. And the byproduct of making that pressure is heat. In the case of these injection systems, fuel isn't just getting burned, it's also being used as an internal lubricant for the high-pressure fuel pump. The low-pressure side of the fuel pump lubricates the internal components that make the high pressure. And it also pulls heat away from the pump. So let's take a second here and trace out the fuel system quick so I can point a few things out to you. All right, so fuel is supplied from the tank into your filter assembly. So it is filtered and measured here for fuel temperature. Once finished, it comes down through this line to the entrance of the high pressure pump, which is this assembly. So in here, some of the fuel is metered into the high pressure circuit, where it is then pressurized and sent up this metal line going to the fuel rail itself for injection into the engine. And the remainder of it goes internal to the pump on the low pressure side to provide lubrication and to remove the heat. So once it's finished, it then exits to this line, goes up to the front of the tractor to the fuel cooler, where it spends a little bit of time here, hopefully reducing its temperature, and exits back to the fuel tank. Okay, so the cooler is positioned on the low pressure return side to remove some of the heat that is created from making that high fuel pressure. Does it remove all of that heat? No, sir, it does not. Over time, the fuel stored in the tank is going to get hotter. And why should you care about that? To answer that question, unfortunately, I have to ask another. Why is there a fuel temp sensor in the first place? Well, one of the reasons there's a fuel temp sensor is so that the ECU, the engine control unit, can monitor the fuel that's making its way into the pump. If that fuel gets too hot, the ECU can impose a D-rate on the engine. A D-rate limits the power output of the engine for the purpose of protection from damage. There can be lots of reasons for a D-rate, but this one in particular is designed to protect the fuel system from the high temperature fuel, which may cause internal damage to the high pressure pump because of changes to the fuel's lubricity as the temperatures go up. So what can you do to protect your engine and your fuel system from high temperature? Well, number one, as we already reviewed, keep your fuel heat exchanger clean. And the second thing, keep your fuel tank full. My system holds about 7.5 gallons and represents a large heat sink that will take a longer time to heat up and will keep my fuel temperatures lower over time. Now, don't get carried away with this. You don't necessarily need to have like a NASCAR fuel dump can to hot swap your fuel after every pass with a brush hog, but at least start your day with a full tank. It's easy enough to do. But if you do choose to use the NASCAR fuel dump can on your tractor, please make a video, link it in the comments. I'd love to see that. Okay, that's it for the coolant system. I get it. I recognize I spent a lot of time on this unsexy area, but it's for a good reason. Think about it a second. Any work from the tractor's perspective makes heat. All of that heat is managed in this little box of real estate that nobody really cares about. If this real estate becomes neglected with a plugged grill or pre-screen or missing seals, then the entire system suffers, putting everything at risk. Think about it. When's the last time a salesman ever offered the cooling system specs to you? They're too busy talking about turbos and torque and power, lift capacity, PTO power and implement size. Nobody cares about the cooling system. Well, you had better start caring. What do your engine, your hydraulics, and your high-pressure fuel system all have in common other than these specific coolers? They're all expensive to fix. Even if you don't break something now, running too hot can damage the lubricity of your fluids, resulting in more wear over time. So why wouldn't you spend a few minutes going over the system and cleaning it? What's that? Good. You should feel guilty. Now get out of my sight. All right, so battery on my tractor's up front here. I think that's pretty typical. It's got a battery hold down and making sure that this thing's tight, nothing's loose here. And then I'm checking my terminal clamps on my negative and on my positive. You can chase your tail for days trying to diagnose odd problems with your engine or your vehicle as a whole tied to loose clamps. So make sure these things are tight. It's in your best interest. All right, last issue under the hood, I promise, is your hood latch. This thing's right up front here too, and while it's not necessarily in the direct air path, it does get covered in dust. It's a good idea to get this thing cleaned out a little bit. I wouldn't use compressed air. It might pack stuff into those springs and those pivots, so I just use a rag or maybe a brush and just wipe some of the dust clean. And then I'd give it a good jolt of dry film lubricant. You don't want anything that's gonna grab onto grit and pull it into that. So, should just take a second, nice and easy thing, but if you can't get your hood open, that's obviously a bad start to the day. So, easy enough to do. Okay, so that's it under the hood. We're going to start the inspection of everything else now by initially focusing on the bucket and loader since it's already up in the air. Let's get to it. All right, so hey, be smart about this. Even though the joystick is locked, gravity can still ruin your day pretty quickly if something goes wrong. So don't stand directly under the loader. Anytime you are in the path of it coming down, make sure that you've got your eyes on it so you can react. Get out of the way. All right, so since we have to deal with gravity and all of its nefarious effects, then it's a good time to inspect the bottom side of your cylinders here for any signs of leakage. Even a trickle of a leak finds a low spot of a surface. So I've got some interesting dry drips here on my torque tube, and I can't find any sign of a leak on the hydraulic circuit, so I think everything's okay, but still gonna take the time to clean that off so I don't worry about it next time. All right, so although it isn't likely, it is possible for water to find its way into your loader arms. When you inspect the loader while it's up in the air, take a look at the bottom of the arms. That's the part you can't see from the operator's seat. There's a drain hole on each arm. Make sure it's free of debris so the water can find its way out if it does get in there. So I'm okay at greasing, but on occasion I overfill my joints. When this happens, grease escapes from the seal and becomes a magnet for dirt. If you overfill, make sure you get a pick, preferably plastic, and get as much of the grease out of the joint as you can. This is pretty easy to see from the bottom side of things. It's also a good time to inspect each of these pins here to make sure that they all have circlips holding things together. If you're missing any, then address it immediately. So do you have spares laying around? Because you should, because you should. It's all right, I don't either. All right, so it's time for the rest of the tractor. Just like we did for the engine, we're gonna start by looking around at the ground here. Any signs of leakage under here? Nice and dry, thankfully. First thing I do is take a moment and perform some cleaning so I can have clear access to everything during my inspection. Tractors get dirty, shocker, I know, but they should be cleaned. They get rocks, leaves, grasses, dirt, sticks, empty Freezy Pop wrappers, you name it, they collect it. So wait, what? Am I the only one that likes Freezy Pops when I'm out working on the tractor when it's hot outside? I find that hard to believe. If you're not indulging in this, and I think you're missing out, kid. All right, so if you're of a similar persuasion as I've got some tips for you. I got a magnet mounted on my fender to hold all these empty wrappers. I've added a handy razor opener on my keychain. It works like a breeze. I've even reached out to LS to see if they consider a Freezy Pop content option on the tractor, but I haven't heard anything back yet. So yeah, you know what? I'm gonna follow up with them. So I use a combination of my compressed air wand and a shop vac to get things cleaned up. Another advantage for removing all that buildup of dirt and grass is that it keeps that crap off of the surfaces to allow heat transfer from the surfaces to the ambient air. It's not like it makes a huge impact, but all this little stuff adds up. And remember, excess heat is the enemy of durability. It's really that simple. So anything you can do to help, you should be doing. So hey, I told you earlier that I would share a little secret with you guys. We use our tractors quite a bit in the woods, and it always seems that we're getting sticks stuck in various places around the tractor. So I've always said that tractors and ATVs are great sources of firewood. Maybe it's just me, but I find that wood gets stuck on my equipment in the strangest places. What the? That's not even statistically possible. All right, so as you can see, wait, what the? How does this even end up here? What the? Oh, come up. What? How is that even possible? So when you're cleaning, set aside any wood you find and add it to your firewood and kindling collection. You can thank me later. All right, now we're moving on to the hydraulic system. We're inspecting everything for leaks, any signs on the cylinders or surrounding components for leakage via wetness or unique dust, dirt collection in those areas. I inspect my hydraulic and HST filter for any signs of damage. They're low on the tractor, and given my issues with sticks and such, I make sure nothing's been hammered on either of them. The O-rings on these hydraulic cylinders, just learned this, these floating O-rings are apparently left over from manufacturing. They're used for protecting the seal during the painting process. They don't perform any other function unless maybe giving you a little heart attack when you see one floating around on your cylinder rod. Thought I would share. Hydraulic quick connects, easy to inspect if you're adding or removing equipment. Take the time to wipe up any hydraulic spills so that you're not wasting time later thinking you have a leak. You've usually got these quick connects on your loader and back at your PTO or remote panel. Give them all a good look and a wipe and a clean. Be done with it. Grease points, hit all the zerks. The manual is a great reference for this. A quick review shows that the loader assembly is easy to determine where the grease goes. Just look for these cylinder pin lock tabs. Each one has a zerk on the outboard side, so grease them up. Underneath the tractor, you've got the power steering cylinder, inboard and outboard mount points. There's also a zerk on the front axle pivot that requires its share of grease. And I found this zerk here on my pedal assembly. I had missed that one before. Okay, now that I've got the bucket lowered, I'm taking a look at that blade condition, that the lock arms are engaged to the bucket. Just taking a general look at it from, just like I did from the bottom side, but now from the top side, cleaning things up, making sure it's good. All right, so tire pressure and tire condition. I reference pressure based on what the manual tells me, usually gives me an acceptable range. My fronts are at 44 PSI for standard, so I'll vary that pressure depending on what I'm doing. If I'm pulling stuff, I'll stick with the 44. If I'm using the loader and skidding logs, then I'm gonna jack that up to 50. Same for the rear, standard pressure of about, I think it was 24 PSI for pull work, and I'll jack it up towards 30 for heavy lifting, like maybe when the backhoe's on. So make sure you're checking your pressure with the valve stem at 12 o'clock. If they're loaded with fluid, then you're gonna end up wearing some of it if you don't. A handy trick for this is to mark your tire with a paint pen to indicate where the stem is so that you can see it from the operator's seat. Mark it with a bright color, preferably a color that doesn't match the color of your rig. That would just kind of mean you're OCD and maybe a little suspect, but I'm gonna use blue just because I gotta be me. Also, make sure you've got your caps on when you're out in the woods. It's easy to get debris packed into the valve and possibly leave you with a flat. So leave those caps on. All right, so PTO and 3-point. Verify the shaft is okay if you're using an implement. Verify that it's correctly installed and locked in. Damaged splines on your PTO are a terrible thing. I'll shoot some dry lubricant onto these ball joints. Since it's dry, it reduces the chance of debris sticking to the lubricant and collecting at wear points. Terrible idea. Lube your lift arm adjusters as well. I use the dry film for the same reason. Inspect your stabilizers for damage and correct function. All your snap rings in place, all your hairpins in place. Hose is okay, no signs of rubbing or pinch damage. Are they supported? Are the wear sleeves for those hoses locked in place as well? All things that you want to check and be on top of. Okay, so fuel cap is on and tank is full. Don't forget, like we talked about before, keeping the tank full helps keep your fuel temperature lower over time. Just keep it full. The transmission fluid level. So the hydraulic fluid is shared with the transmission, so make sure all implements are lowered to ensure that you've got the correct level. Otherwise that stuff all ends up in the cylinder or whatever, so it's going to affect your level. So make sure it is all relieved. Clean the area around the dipstick before removing it. I always check mine when warm. The manual doesn't call for this, but I just think it's best case, so that's how I do it. Front axle. Verify there's no signs of leakage on the axle housing. This includes the drive shaft connection, any castings that are fastened to the housing, the hub rotation points, and the inner hubs. Any fluid leaks in this area will likely be coated with dirt, so you will see a pile of dirty, grimy dirt. Then you've likely found a leak, so take a close look. All right, we have finally made it to the operator seat. Just a few more things to check before we can get to work. So I'm going to make sure that my seat belt is safely tucked away, not going to fall down onto the axle. I'm checking my ROPS is engaged and ready to save me in case things get stupid. God gave you ROPS for a reason, so use it. It might actually save your ass one day. Okay, I'm checking all my pedals, making sure they've got free movement, no signs of binding. My brake pedals are locked together. Okay, last thing, freezy pops, got my cooler, got my magnet, got my opener. Okay, we are ready for key on checks. All right, so last check is key on checks. Turn the key on and look at your cluster. Much like my wife, this tractor has all these things that it might want to tell me about. If these lights go away when the engine is running, then you can relax and get on with your work. If they don't, then it's also like my wife in that I should probably listen to what it has to say or there will be repercussions to deal with. But unlike my wife, I have a manual that will translate what it's trying to tell me so I know exactly what it means. So I therefore can investigate and address, not have to guess or call my friends or my psychiatrist to help me solve her incessant riddles. So wait a second, it's not just me, is it? My tractor in my head talks to me in my wife's voice. When I see this symbol, I hear my wife telling me, "Oh my God, your high beams are on." Or, "Take your parking brake off, you idiot."
All right, let's get to it.
Engine oil pressure's low, oh my God! Engine speed control active. ESC mode is active. Glow plug engaged. Battery fuel level is low. Your battery's not charging. Water and fuel plugs disengaged. So also, pay attention to your hour meter. When's your next service interval? You ready for it? Got everything you need to do it? Much like my wife, the tractor is reminding me that we have a date night coming up soon. If I miss it, there could be repercussions. All right, so just to show you what the inspection process removed from this tractor, I've collected and swept everything into piles so that you can reflect on why you should give your tractor a thorough pre-use inspection. So that's it for today. I hope you found this information helpful. If you have any questions or anything to add, do so in the comments section, especially that NASCAR fuel thing. I'll upload some videos of this rig in action pretty soon, as well as some of my other tractors. So I'll see you then. Thanks a lot for watching.